Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Gallagher. I am a principal software engineer at Red Hat. And today I'm going to talk to you about the sunk cost fallacy, the other hard problem in computer science. Hey. The traditional joke in computer science is that there are two hard problems: cache invalidation, naming things, and off-by-one errors. The off-by-one error bit is the punchline of the joke, but one of the more insightful points about this is that it actually includes a non-technical problem in the middle of it. It reminds us that the code is not the whole of computer science. There's a subjective human component to things as well. This talk is going to focus on another of those subjective human components, the risk of falling into the sunk cost fallacy. So, what is the sunk cost fallacy? How many people here have ever found themselves saying, well, we've come this far, we might as well see it through? Okay. How about, we don't want all this work to go to waste? Congratulations. Oops, jumped ahead. You are victims of the sunk cost fallacy. That is it in a nutshell. What is it really? Continuing down an undesirable path just because you believe you've reached the point of no return. There's an old Turkish proverb, and I forget who it is, but somebody at Red Hat has it as a signature, which is great. No matter how far you have gone down the wrong path, turn back. I've been at Red Hat for quite a while, and I've worked on a number of projects, and I have an alarmingly high rate of projects that I've been involved in that we've killed off. And the reason for this is because we stay cognizant of the sunk cost fallacy. We recognize that there are times at which you have put in, yes, you've put in a lot of work, and maybe some of it is really good and really high quality, but you're not delivering something that you actually want to deliver. And for a couple of examples, things that I've worked on, you may have seen me standing up here in past years talking about the OpenLM project, which was going to be the one end-all, be-all API for administering your system. Yeah, I don't see it around either. And we worked on that for a good 2 years. And ultimately, what we saw was that we were building good code, but nobody wanted to use it. It was, the API was comprehensive and was capable, but it was also unwieldy. And so we gathered as a group, and we made a conscious decision that, yes, we'd put a lot of hard work into this, and yes, we were proud of the work we did, but it wasn't going to go anywhere, and it was time to send it to the farm. You may have heard a little something about Fedora Modularity. Yeah, I heard someone back there. Fedora Modularity it has been a project that I'm sure you've heard a little bit about here at DevConf. And we had something I'm calling Fedora Modularity 1.0, which was our attempt to make everything in Fedora completely modular. And that was extremely ambitious, and it turned out probably technically infeasible. So again, we took a long, hard look at it, passed our deadline, in fact, and came to the decision that, yeah, it needed to go back to the drawing board. The goals were right, the methodology was wrong. And so we, again, had to take that back. This session, this is actually kind of funny. Last night at dinner, I was talking about this to someone about how I'd been working on a version of this talk to basically anyone who would listen for the last 2 years. And I figured I'd gathered enough material to actually turn it into a talk for DevConf. She pointed out that it's possible I'd actually fallen into the sunk cost fallacy right there. My attempts to convince people hadn't worked, so instead of giving up, I went bigger. So I'm going to let you guys decide at the end of this talk whether or not I am guilty of this right now. So what isn't the sunk cost fallacy? Engineers are human beings. Humans are emotional, often insecure creatures. The sunk cost fallacy works because it preys on our insecurities. It preys on our culture equating giving up with failing. Failure is a really unpleasant feeling. I don't know, can I get a show of hands for anybody who's really excited when they screw up? Yeah. So what do? What are humans really good at? Lying to ourselves. We tell ourselves we haven't failed unless we've given up. And that translates into, well, maybe if I just spend a little more time on this, it'll get adoption. Maybe if I work really hard, I can break that law of physics and it'll actually work. And we keep doing that over and over and over again. And we bury ourselves. We dig ourselves into a really, really deep hole. So how do we get out? We'll dig our way out. Wait, no, that's doing more of the same. So it's really easy to fall into this hole. So what are the ways we can try to keep an eye on this? How do we, when it comes time to think about, maybe it's time to put our pet project to sleep. How do we go about that? How do we approach that conversation with ourselves and with our team? So I've got a few techniques that I put together that helps to do this. The first one, most of the people in here are probably engineers, so this is the one you're going to jump to immediately. It is also the least effective. Analyze the true costs. Do the math. If all signs are pointing to that this idea is going to fail in the marketplace, in the community, with your end users, save yourself the time and effort. Save your employer the money. Kick it out of the way. Move on to something else that you're going to enjoy doing more. Because that's the key problem with the sunk cost fallacy, is that it is actively preventing you from doing something better with your time, from doing something you enjoy more, to doing something that's going to make you more money, make you more popular in the community, win friends and influence. So, yes, take a very hard look, like Spock. Do like Spock and look at the raw numbers of what you're working on. Now, like I said, this is probably the one that is going to be the least successful technique because, as I said before, humans are not objective creatures. We are really lousy at accurately identifying our own problems. So the next one is repurpose your work. Consider places where the work that you have been doing might actually be useful for some other goal, because that helps you get over that "I've failed" feeling and into, I don't know how many people here are familiar with the likely apocryphal story about the creation of the light bulb. Reportedly, one of Edison's contemporaries came to him and was mocking him because he had been spending a couple of years trying to invent the electric light bulb and not succeeded. And what Edison told him was, I haven't failed. I've found 246 ways not to make a light bulb. Now, he may have also been falling into the sunk cost fallacy there, but we know how that one turned out, so let's push that one aside. But if you can repurpose your work to a new target, then a lot of that pressure comes off of you to be able to to do the real cost analysis and to make those hard decisions, because you know that you can take some of that "I don't want this to go to waste" feeling out of it, and that can be really powerful. That can be the thing that pushes you past. For example, and I've got a couple of examples that I've already mentioned. With the OpenLMI project, we did a lot of work at the OpenLMI layer, but we did even more work when we were building the APIs for the system services that were underneath it in order to power that API layer. And we were able to stop and take stock of that and realize a lot of that was going to be useful for things like the cockpit project. And so that project took over a lot of what OpenLMI was doing at the low level, and so that wasn't wasted effort. And when we figured that out, it helped make this decision easier. Similarly, while we were doing it, I had to approach some interesting problems we had with bootstrapping certificate creation in order to securely interact with OpenLMI. So I built a series of tools that helped us create something better than self-signed certificates for that purpose. And that now has evolved into another tool that is getting reasonable use in Fedora. So it's possible to make these decisions easier by figuring out what else you can do with it. So then it's no longer this black mark on your soul. I failed. It's now, well, I did this good thing. It wasn't what I set out to do, but unintentional success is still success. With Modularity 1.0, we ultimately discovered, as I said, that we really couldn't go through with the approach we were taking. But most of the tools work that had been done to support that was still going to be useful in the 2.0 work that we have kicked off since December, November. And so I also honestly believe that most of that tooling work would not have gotten as far and as complete as it did without the pressure we had put on them of needing to cover this enormous use case. I think that if we had started with where we are today, it would probably have progressed a lot slower and we'd still be in trouble. So that's another thing. We're good at lying to ourselves. Lie to ourselves positively. Tell ourselves the lies that make us feel like we're still accomplishing something. Bring yourself, the power of positive thinking. Great lies. Very important. So the third technique, no, that was right. Okay. Take a vacation. And I don't necessarily mean, skip off to Maui and don't tell your boss. Though, if that's what you like, that's fine. What I mean is stop working on that thing for a few days, a week. Ideally, take an actual vacation, leave the office, leave everything related to it behind. But give yourself a little bit of distance from the problem. Figure out what your life looks like without that thing in it, because it makes it a lot easier to separate yourself from the fear of failing at it, because there's still you out there. And I know I have this problem. My life is always pretty tightly wound into whatever it is I'm working on. And that makes it particularly hard for me to know when to quit, and that's a hard word too. So yeah, taking a step back and really examining what things look like outside of that is important. And then when you come back, you'll generally have a fresh perspective and can go again and look at those costs and look at the repurposing and figure out where to go next and figure it out more objectively than you would have otherwise. So, as always, Rendell Munroe beat me to the punch with this one. So it's only fair that I should end on that XKCD comic, which it really hammers home the point that I'm trying to make here. And if you find yourself saying, well, we've come this far, consider that you may very well find yourself in a far better place if you change paths and embark on a new journey. And I ran through my time really quick there. So I have a lot of time for questions. So the question was, did I use these techniques on myself or or with my team, or what was the last one? With your boss. Or with my boss. And the answer was yes, with all of them. I'm sorry? In which order? Yes. In different situations, it was different time. It was different things, because in some cases, it really depends on who is the first person to decide that maybe it needs to be evaluated, because that's a really hard step too, and I probably should talk to that a little bit. Because again, we're good at lying to ourselves so well that we don't even notice there's a problem sometimes. So in some of these cases, my boss came to me and said, are we ever going to get this? Is this ever going to happen? I think you know that one. Know when that one happened. And in other cases, like the OpenLMI case, I believe it was myself and one other team member who just stopped and took stock and said, we're not getting the adoption we need. Let's start having that conversation with the rest of the team. And again, it was, and each individual person had to pretty much go through those same steps themselves because it ultimately, the examples that I gave were all made by consensus with very minimal exception. But it did require basically everyone to stop, take stock, analyze the costs, figure out where their work could be done again, and in many cases take a vacation, sometimes before, sometimes after. Yeah, so it definitely takes at least one person on a team to ask the hard question to get started, and the more people I talk about this with, the more likely that person is to be the person who kicks that off. So that's why I felt like this was an important session to have. With what? I'm sorry? With your motivation and... Okay, the question is, let me try to rephrase the question and let me know if I get it right. When you start encountering difficulty in your project, does keeping this in mind impact your motivation to continue? Perhaps, and I mean, I can't speak to everyone's method of motivation. But I would like to believe that the analyzing of the costs portion requires you to actually think about whether or not it's going to succeed, whether or not the problem that you're facing is one that is reasonable to overcome in a finite amount of time or is likely to be an infinitely recurring problem. Those are, and yes, there is no perfect answer. Assuming that you've hit the sunk cost fallacy and bailing out at the first sign of danger, not a great choice. But if you see that your project is consistently having difficulties, be it with adoption or mostly with adoption or end user use, because if it's not, if people are using it and you're just complaining because they're filing bugs all the time, congratulations, you've got a good problem to have. But if no matter how hard you work, nobody wants your floor washing toothpaste, it's time to put that one to bed.
So have you been through this yourself?
A lot.
If you're able to approach that as a manager, as a leader, would you say that having already an idea of what to do after helps, or do you have time to make peace with the death of the project?
All right. So the question is, acting as a manager or as a lead, is it helpful when going to your team to have a plan for what to do afterwards first, or do I feel that they need to have time to grieve before considering the next move? I think that's going to depend very heavily on the team that you're working with, and also whether or not we're talking about a technical manager or a pointy-haired boss. It can be useful to say, if it's very clear that portions of it are reusable, I would absolutely say, Pingu, I'm sorry, I don't think this project is going to finish out, but that tool you built to support it, that we want to use on this. That is going to make the conversation a lot easier. But I also wouldn't say it's a requirement. I think that it can be reasonable to acknowledge that this is just the wrong approach, and especially if you're not a technical manager, have that conversation with your lead and ask them to consider ways that they could continue to, it could use some of what they've done to advance another project. I will get to you if there's no one else, but you're hogging all the questions, Pierre. I'm talking to a technical, oh, sorry, the question was, it sounds like I'm talking to I'm offering a lot of technical reasons about why to do.
Have you ever had to do the same thing, but for political reasons? Like for political reasons, the project you're working on is, trying to figure out, is this worth even continuing given the politics that are going on?
So the question is whether or not I've ever had to do this when the thing holding us up was political as opposed to technical, and how to handle that. And my employer requires me to say no. But no, in seriousness, I haven't. That has not actually been a problem I've specifically faced, but I recognize that it certainly is, and I think that the same general techniques apply. I mean, the cost analysis is less literal and more cost in sanity, cost in stress, and really only you can determine what that limit is for you. But it's a little less objective, to be sure. Do I? Yeah, I've got 2 more minutes.
So there are basically two sunk costs. One is I have the wrong idea, and the other one is I have the wrong implementation of the idea.
So,
face both and are both equally equivalent to overcome.
So the question here is, there are 2 problems that you might face. I had the wrong idea, or I have the wrong implementation of the idea. I think that, well, I've definitely faced both. I think that ultimately the latter one, I have the wrong implementation of the idea, is what we ended up with in Modularity. I have the wrong idea was definitely the one we came up with in OpenLMI, and probably RollKit as well, which I didn't talk about earlier because that one was less of a successful turnaround. I don't know that they are fundamentally any different with how you approach the approach dealing with the sunk cost fallacy part of things. So, and I think I am out of time, or do I? I might have time for one more quick question if anybody has one more. Where do you draw the line between recovering a failed project or failing project, I assume you mean, or calling it quits? That is probably the topic of an entire talk on its own, but I don't think I can give you an objective answer. I think that is always going to matter on all of the context. There are just too many variables. Is the problem that you aren't going to finish it in time? Then maybe you ask for more time. Is the problem that you are getting up against your deadline and realize that nobody actually wants this thing? Well, that one's a pretty obvious answer. It really is going to be dependent on the situation.
Okay, if you have more questions, you can probably discuss this with Steven on the hall.
Yep.
Thank you, Steven.
Thank you.
Steve, Martin Pitt, say hello.